What resilience means to you after all these years, after all the things that happened to you from the very beginning of your life until now? What is resilience means?
I think of resilience as bamboo. Bamboo is in the tree, very, very resilient and very strong. But the reason I think of that is because it's got to be flexible and it moves and it bends and it doesn't necessarily break. That's how I think about resilience. You look at it and where are you at a different point of your life? What's the season that you are in? What is the context that you are dealing with?
Welcome to the Resilient Leader podcast with me, Dona, Amelia. And now I'm so excited to have our speaker and also a guest for today, Sue Stephen. Sue, how are you? Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Donna, for having me. I'm doing really, really well. Thank you.
Fantastic. So for those who are just like listening to you, please tell us about you and a little bit recap about you. What's your excited all about these days? Please go ahead.
Yes, I'll share. So I am Curacao-born and Netherlands raised. Curacao is a tiny island in the Dutch Caribbean, about the size of Ang Mo Kio in Singapore. And fun fact, for the first time they qualified for the World Cup this time, but I digress. So I spent most of my formative years in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. I'm one of three children, a middle child, and I mentioned that because I'll come back to it later in the context of leadership. And I grew up in a multiracial society where, quite frankly, as an immigrant child, I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. That's something that is definitely very formative about me in life. I thought I was going to become a professional dancer and do that my entire life. Little did I know that life had other plans. And as such, life pivoted in such way that I entered the world of work in business, firstly through HR, later customer success, and most recently sales leadership. And that has taken me in the last 15 years from Amsterdam to London to now calling Singapore my home the last 7 years. And when I'm not working, I'm spending time with my husband of 21 years, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. So that's a little bit about me.
Love it, love it, love it. You mentioned that your journey, I think I would love to hear more. So you've been in HR and then lately you are in sales. So if you can tell us about your journey, which one you like the most and maybe which one that teach you the biggest lesson?
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky to say which one I like the most because the reality is I've learned so much from each different chapter that has led me to pursue the next chapter and the next one. If I start with the context, like I started my career in HR because when I graduated, it was the 0708 crisis. And quite frankly, there just weren't that many junior roles available with the market context. That just was what there was to do. But as I became more senior in my career, opportunities started to arise, and my first international relocation came about when I moved from Amsterdam to London to Dublin. It was a very natural shift to move from HR as my domain expertise after about 10 years to customer success at LinkedIn because the people who I would be speaking to were CHROs, chief people officers. So I understood their world really, really clearly. And it was, I had to learn customer success as a new discipline, but I really understood what it meant to be in a people related role. And that was my first experience with a commercial role, if you will. The aim at the time at LinkedIn was mainly to retain clients and to upsell. But once I got like my fingers dirty on that, I was like, you know what? I think I should really carry quota and have a seat at the table in a way that I'm bringing in the numbers. And that's when ultimately I shifted across from customer success to sales leadership at Facebook 8 years ago when I joined. Now, I think the discipline of customer success, which is client facing account management, is very similar to sales leadership. Except the difference is, of course, the industry. I pivoted across to advertising and marketing, which was a new discipline to me. And in that same move, I moved across from Dublin to Singapore. And I will tell you, in my career, that's been about 20 years now, the pivot from Europe to Asia, from a role perspective, it wasn't necessarily a much bigger role because I looked after Malaysia as a country manager at Facebook at the time. But because of the cultural context and the nuance, of moving to an entirely different region that I'd not lived and worked in before, with the pandemic at the backdrop, that probably stretched me in ways I could not imagine. This is now
Mm.
7 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. So all of these years must be tell you something that taught you and brought you to who you are. If you can put the highlight of the leadership thought, or like what shaped you to be who you are now, what moment is
Yeah.
that?
Um, I think there's two things that really matter. One is context is so important, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit more. And the recognition that wherever we are in our life, be it in business or personally, life comes in seasons, and different seasons require different things. Let me zoom in on the first point around context matters. I mean that in the context of cultural differences and how you lead teams that come from different countries, having to acknowledge and recognize where you come from. So, in my case, I come from the Netherlands. That's at least where my formative years were, relatively flat. Culture in terms of hierarchical power structures, not really that caring that much about who's the boss and the power distance and all of that. Now, when you shift across to Asia, we all know, and I think you do as well, Donna, it is exactly the opposite. That becomes incredibly important. So, flipping that context was important for me to be able to lead effectively. And I'll add another point to that. I led a lot of multi generational teams, which means from all the way from Gen Z to millennials and above. And to have those layers of, on one hand, cultural context, multi-generational context, that's something that will stretch you in ways that you honestly can't imagine. I think I grew a lot from that experience. And then I'll speak to seasons. In that time when I moved to Singapore shortly thereafter, I mean, we all remember 2020 when the pandemic hit. And
Mm.
in Singapore, for those who are in Singapore, circuit breaker, I was not able to travel to meet clients face to face. It was more zooming in and zooming out. But at the time, I also decided to pursue a degree and go back and get my master's in business school in organizational behavior. And what that meant is that I'm in a new region, but I also have personal stressors because I'm studying outside of work. And
Mm.
lastly, but definitely not least, I was expecting a little one. So bringing it back
Oh.
to seasons, obviously very joyful occasion, but bringing it back to seasons. And one of the things, because we are talking about resilience, when I think about that, there was just too much going on in my life, both in the professional context and the personal context, that genuinely reflecting back to that time and my leadership, I would say that as a new mom re-entering the workforce with an expanded scope, I don't think I had what my team needed at the time to lead in the most effective ways. Now, naturally, that shifted over time, but that's definitely a period that I think back to that required resilience. And it's probably the time that I received my lowest ever, if you will, manager feedback. But again, this is where context matters, right? Because it made sense where I was at, how much I had on my plate, and it was things that I think were easy to address. But I had to recognize that, like, right, I need to meet people where they are. And in order to do that, I need to actually figure out what I need as a new mom in the context of leading effectively and that whole combination.
Well, and you know what? Actually, what you just mentioned, it's really makes sense. And many, I believe, right, ladies out there also might be in your position in one point of the time, right? Especially, I can hear you, new place, and then probably new culture, and then school, and then being a mom, all in one go. And then, of course, you need to be a leader where everybody expecting you in certain level and so on. But then back then, what was you can consider as your lowest point, and I would love to hear how would you, I mean, how you come up again, bounce back and really be the person that really, like cherish those kind of resilient moments. Tell me.
Yeah. I don't believe that in your career or in life you can ever do it alone. But that was something that I really had to learn the hard way in terms of asking for help and indicating where I was at in terms of additional support that I required. I mentioned earlier that I was raised by a single mom and my grandmother. I think that behavior of trying to do everything by yourself was role model to me very early on. But if I think about what got me through, and ultimately from the lowest point to kind of growing and flexing that resilience muscle, is at first my tribe. My tribe really starts with my husband, Remco, who you know very well. We've been together for 21 years and we've navigated several international moves, becoming partners, and becoming more senior in our career. So I think he's a very important person in my life, whether that's on personal or on work front. A small community of people who I trust with what I'm dealing with from a business perspective, that I'm able to bounce idea. And in this case, particularly, someone who became a very good friend of mine at Meta. Her name is Nicole Tan. Nicole, I'll make sure to send you this episode so you can hear this. I was working very close with her in Malaysia, and I think there was a moment in time where she really recognized that I could do with some additional support, and I was really grateful for the kindness that she extended me in really, I guess, lifting a veil from how are things done here in this part of the world. And she massively invested in my success. And we worked so well together. But having that tribe, so I mentioned my husband, but in addition to that, in business, of just a few people who you trust, because we've got to be mindful of the notion of face as well here in Asia, so that on one hand you can flex and grow your resilience muscle, but at the same time you can also say face, we can do hard things. Like, I've learned from it. I know what I would do differently. But at the end of the day, the human species is incredibly resilient, and we can do hard things, even though it's not necessarily fun. But it's absolutely necessary to stretch and grow. Because if you compare it to, and I train quite actively, if you train it to going to the gym, it's no different. If you want to grow muscle, you need to kind of tear it a little bit to ultimately be able to kind of grow the muscle. So we can do hard things.
I love it. And then I agree with you. Asking for help is very, very important. And I think that's also undervalued and not that easy as we speak. Some people really hard to asking for help for whatever reason, right? Maybe they don't want to look weak and so on. But I believe vulnerability is one of the strengths that we need to carry, because being vulnerable and able to asking for help doesn't mean that we are weak. But as you rightly say, right, you just like able to accept help and, like involve other people to your journey in your life, basically, right?
But
Wonderful.
I do think it's important that you are mindful of who you ask for help. So if I think to EGN and having been a member for a number of years already, I think trust is necessary in order for you to be able to kind of reveal what's going on. And not everyone has earned the privilege of knowing what you're going through. So I think it's important that as you're working through things, you're mindful of where are you going to actually show that vulnerability. I've certainly found that in the group that I've been part of for the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing in. So, for those who just listen to this podcast, so EGN is Executive Global Network, where I led. Yes, we are a professional peer network and leadership ecosystem where we really providing a safe space for leader like Sue and many other leaders to be able to be themselves, to be able to discuss about their real current business challenge and get help from their peers in a very, very safe environment. Because as rightly said by Sue, we cannot just be vulnerable with random people in random occasion. We need to always also like taking care of our image and so on, especially if we are leaders and we're representing our company and so on, right? But thank you for bringing that in. So so if let's say you are like meeting the younger generation who are really like about to go to the next stages of their life or in their career, what would be like your number one or number two advice to them, especially if it is a girl or a lady out there who like just about to go up? Any advice from you?
So the first one that comes to mind, this is something that I have said to myself in many moments when I doubted my capability and the notion of imposter syndrome. I don't know if you have come across this, Donna, but it's a lady, a young girl, and her name is Pippi Longstockings. So this was a cartoon that I watched when I was little, growing up in the Netherlands. And Pippi Longstockings, she was a little bit of a rebel. Maybe that's why I loved her. She always said, "I've never done it before, but I know I can do it." So there's that aspect around backing yourself and trusting that even though you've never done something before, you are able to do it. And then the second part is it's so important to find your tribe and have a community of both men and women, because sometimes when you lack that belief in self, you can borrow it from those who are around you and look at yourself through their perspective. So they would be the two things that I would say to her.
First of all, this Pippi Longstocking,
Pippi
correct? That
Longstocking, look her up.
I know because when I was in Sweden, I heard about this a lot. Apparently, like Netherlands and Sweden, I think that book is like one of the book everybody needs to. I mean, every kid needs to read and needs to know and so on. But now I hear from you how important it is, and yeah, very good learning point. You know, like yes, awesome, good. Lastly, then about resilience, what resilience means to you after all these years, after all the things that happened to you from the very beginning of your life until now. What is resilience means to you?
You know, resilience for me has gotten an entirely different meaning since I moved to Asia, because I do think the challenges that I just described to you in terms of picking up a new market, a new portfolio, flexing my muscles culturally, and so on. So the stretch has been real and probably like one of the biggest growths I have experienced. I think of resilience as bamboo. Bamboo is in the tree, very, very resilient and very strong. And I have named many projects internally Project Bamboo, I will admit. But the reason I think of that is because it's got to be flexible and it moves and it bends and it doesn't necessarily break. That's how I think about resilience. You look at it and where are you at a different point of your life? What's the season that you are in? What is the context that you are dealing with? Now, I left Meta after 8 years and I've been taking a career break. So it's been wonderful to be work free for the time being and reflect on some of the things that I may want to do when I return to the workforce. And at this point in time, I don't know yet what that is. And there's some days where there's like a little uncertainty that pops up, but you know what? That in itself has helped me develop resilience, because what it teaches me is that I don't always need to know how things are going to play out to trust that everything's going to work out. So, resilience for me, I think of bamboo. I think about not necessarily needing to know how everything's going to play out. I think about the different seasons that I have traveled through, and that even if I don't know exactly how something's going to play out, that I know I can do hard things and that I can learn even things that I have perhaps never done before. So, a much more nuanced perspective I have today, where I think I'm also much kinder to myself in terms of how I meet myself when there's whatever challenges that I face. And I'm sure there will be as I go back to the world of work eventually.
I'm so happy to see all the smile that you are enjoying your current career break, and I agree with you also that you will be getting the best like job that you ever dreamed of. I'm sure with your ability, or maybe you can be an entrepreneur soon. Who knows, right? But as you
I don't
rightly
exclude
say,
that. I don't exclude
ah,
that. That's definitely an ambition I have. It's not as of yet in this season, but I do not exclude that, Donna.
absolutely. And like we need to always like really enthusiast and appreciate and be positive of what comings, right? So and then when it's come, enjoy the ride because that is life is all about. It's like a roller coaster, but if you enjoyed it and like you will thrive in whatever season that you have. Agree?
100%. There was one thing I forgot to mention earlier, but I think it's as I reflect on resilience as a journey, one
Mm.
thing that actually has really helped me and it continues to help me till today, I really grew in the gym. And what I mean by that is I started lifting heavier weights. I got very serious about my weightlifting probably 2023 or so onwards. I work with a personal trainer and so on and so forth. But why I mention that is because, so let's take deadlift. I started deadlifting back at the time and I could only do 40 kg. And my PT said to me, look, I think by the end of the year, you're going to be able to do a one rep max of 100 kg. And I was like, dude, I think you're delusional. I really don't think this is feasible. That conversation we had was August of that year. And you know what? We set the target for December. And it was actually November, early November, that I hit a 1 kg or 100 kg one rep max with my deadlift. Now, it shares a couple of things, a couple of insights from this. Borrowed confidence, because he had this belief that I definitely was going to be able to do it, which I was like, I don't know if this makes sense. Secondly, just keep going there, right? Putting in the rep, having the process, showing up again and again. Some training days are great, others are not. But ultimately, what it showed is that I genuinely didn't think that that was going to be feasible. I thought maybe a longer time frame, but eventually I put in the work, I kept showing up, and I was able to pick up that bar and do that one max rep. And what naturally happens is this sort of belief in yourself that you are strong from within, it pours into other areas of your life, including work. So that's definitely been something that I think has contributed to my journey when it comes to resilience.
I like that borrowed success and borrowed belief and so on. If somebody believe in you, then you borrow it, you embed it in yourself, and then it's becoming your superpower as well. Congratulations! And I know that you're also in the high rocks and all in the competition with your husband, right? Which is awesome. I only still do the full marathon and so on, but maybe I need to follow you in doing all these deadlifts and all strength training and so on. I think it's so beautiful, and I love the journey as well. It teaches us a lot, and it's no different between life and the ability of building your muscle, your ability, and most importantly your mindset and your belief in yourself that you can grow, right? The circumstances, and also regardless how you feel like it might be impossible, but when you do it, right, you are ultimately get there. And for you, you get there even earlier than your target, so your smart goal is really achieved, right, in the like the time that not even there yet, but you already achieved your target. Awesome. Thank you so much for our conversation, Sue. Really lovely hearing all your insight. I believe everybody who listened to this episode will also resonate with you a lot, because you sharing everything about your story, from being a mother, to from changing location, to understanding culture, and then having a career break and so on. I believe this is going to be like useful for whoever listen to us. So thank you again for joining me in the
So
Resilient
much fun.
Leadership podcast. Thank you so much, Sue. Have a
Thanks
great
so
day ahead.
much. Take care. Bye.